Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for Wine Tasting 101 with Wino Noire. My name is Elizabeth Ajunwa, and I work for the Prince George's Memorial Library System, and we're so happy to have Desiree Harrison-Brown to give us all of her knowledge about wine and wine tasting and introduce the public to all the ways that you can do wine tasting, which I'm really excited to learn about. Desiree, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so just to get started, I wanted to let everyone know a little bit about Desiree. So Desiree Harrison-Brown is the wine ambassador for Pernod Ricard. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. Pernod Ricard winemakers and the founder of the brand Wino Noire. Born and raised in Maryland, Desiree graduated from the University of Maryland College Park with a bachelor's in communication. After taking a wine class, she completely fell in love with wine and founded the brand Wino Noire with the mission of making wine accessible to diverse groups. Her goal is for every wine drinker to have a solid foundation of wine knowledge and to be able to explore the world of wine with confidence. She recently completed her Wine and Spirit Education Trust Level 3 and was the recipient of the Young Leader Summit Scholarship for the SOMCON in 2019. So her go-to wine is anything sparkling. Okay, anything sparkling, I like that. I like that. So what we're going to do today is Desiree is going to give us a presentation on the basics. So I'm going to let you take that away, Desiree.
Great. I'll go ahead and get started and share my screen. Thanks for that lovely introduction. So welcome everyone to the Wino 101 or Wine Tasting 101 presentation. We're going to learn a lot today about wine. So to get started, I'm going to ask a few questions and you can answer yes or no to yourself about these questions. Do you feel intimidated by wine? Do you find it hard to pinpoint specific flavors in wine? Do you always buy the same brand or stick to the same varietals when you go wine shopping? Do you only drink sweet wine or do you only drink dry wine? And do you want to be a more informed wine consumer? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then I think you're going to find this presentation to be really helpful. So before we get started, I'll just give a quick little intro to echo what Elizabeth said. I'm Desiree Harrison-Brown, and I'm going to be the instructor today. I am the founder of the brand Wino Noire, and I'm also a wine ambassador for Pernod Ricard winemakers. I hold a level 3 certification from the Wine and Spirit Education Trust, and the Wine and Spirit Education Trust, or WSET, is a London-based educational body, but you can take their courses anywhere around the world. So I studied here in DC, but if you just Google Wine and Spirit Education Trust and you want to take a wine class, you can find a wine school near you. So let's get into the fun stuff. We're gonna talk wine. So you take the sugar in the grapes, you add in yeast, and the yeast ferments the sugar and turns it into alcohol. And then another byproduct of this equation is carbon dioxide. So that's how you get the bubbles when you're drinking champagne or some other sparkling wine. And heat is also a byproduct of the fermentation process. So very simply put, when you think of wine, you can think sugar plus yeast equals alcohol. So wine grapes are a lot like table grapes, where you have the skin of the grapes and then the inside of the grape has pulp, juice, and sugars, as well as seeds. So a lot of table grapes that we eat don't have seeds, but sometimes you do find some that have seeds. with the wine grape, the skins is where the color comes from. So when you think of a red wine, that wine is getting the color from the red skins of the grape. The inside of the grape is going to be where you find all the juice, the sugars. That's where that sugar is going to be that you need to create the fermentation in the equation that we just talked about. And the seeds add a bitter component to the wine. So in most winemaking, you get rid of the seeds because you don't want too much bitterness in your wine. And then you also have stems, or pips. So the pips are also removed most of the time in the winemaking process because they add a bit of tannin to the wine. And we'll define tannin shortly so that we know what some of those terms mean, but it's that bitterness and that astringent character in the wine. So that's the anatomy of a wine grape. So let's talk about the service and storage of wine. So it's very common that when we're drinking red wine and when we're drinking white wine, we typically drink them at not the right temperature. So with white wine, we usually drink them too cold, and with red wine, we usually drink them a little too warm. So with sparkling wine, my absolute favorite style of wine, this is a wine that you want to make sure is really cold. There's quite a bit of pressure in the wine, so chilling it down to a very low temperature helps to preserve the bubbles and not have a huge explosion when you're opening it. And you can serve that wine at about 38 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit. So if you just pop it in the freezer for maybe 30 minutes before you're ready to drink it, 30 minutes to an hour, you don't want it to freeze, to start to freeze and get ice in it, but you do want it to be really cold. And then a light body white wine can also be served at that same temperature. So Sauvignon Blanc is considered a light body white wine. For your full body whites and your aromatic whites and also your rosé, you can serve those just a little bit warmer at 45 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit. So these are going to be fridge cold. So if you just keep them in the fridge, they will be the right temperature. A full-bodied white wine would be considered Chardonnay. An aromatic white wine is, an example is Riesling, and then Rosé, the lovely pink wine that we all love so much. Next are your light-bodied red wines and your medium-bodied red wines. So for these wines, you want to drink them at 55 to 60 degrees. So for those, I would pop them in the fridge for 15 minutes before you're ready to, 15 to 30 minutes before you're ready to drink them, and they'll be the perfect temperature. A lot of times with red wine, we think of room temperature, but that's a bit too warm. So a light-bodied red would be considered a Pinot Noir, and then a medium-bodied, you can say a Merlot. Then you're moving on to your full-bodied and your dessert wine. So a full-bodied would be a Cabernet, and a dessert wine would be any fortified wine. So think port, so wines with a lot of alcohol. These can be served at room temperature, but not 72 degrees room temperature. So if you know that you keep your house a little bit warmer, you can definitely chill these down a bit more. Another important aspect to consider when drinking wine is the proper glassware. So on the screen, you can see that there are several different glasses that can be used when drinking wine. So for red wine, full-bodied red wines, and light-bodied red wines, you want to be drinking out of a glass that has a larger bowl. So I have a red wine here, which is an example, and you can see that this bowl is really large. And this allows you to really get your nose in the glass and to smell all of the aromas, to let some air get into the wine so that those aromas are released and you can smell all the goodness. For rosé and light-bodied white wines, you want to drink it out of a glass with a somewhat smaller bowl. So if you look at these compared to each other, the white wine glass and the red wine glass they differ in size. So with white wine and rosé, they have more delicate flavors, and you want to be able to preserve those and not get so much oxygen and air into your glass. So you want to serve it out of a smaller glass. For sparkling wine, a flute is the perfect option because it helps to preserve the bubbles. For me personally, I love to drink my sparkling wines out of white wine glasses. And that's because with a flute, you can't really stick your nose in a flute glass. It's just a bit too small. So for me, a white wine glass does the trick for sparkling. And then last but not least is your fortified wine, like port. So fortified means that they're adding additional alcohol in the form of brandy, and you want to serve that out of a smaller glass because you don't want to smell all of that alcohol. You want to get the fruit aromas without getting the burn from the alcohol. So we talked about the proper glassware, but let's talk about how to hold the glass. So when holding the glass, you always want to hold the glass by the stem. So holding the glass by the stem helps to keep the wine at the perfect temperature. So we just talked about the temperature of the wine. And once you get your bottle the right temperature, you want to make sure that it stays that temperature. And when you hold the glass by the bowl, your hands are very warm. Think about how chocolate melts in your hands. You don't want your wine warming up in the bowl. So you always want to hold it either by the base of the glass or by the stem away from the bowl. It also prevents unsightly fingerprints on your glass. So if you want to keep it looking really beautiful, this holding it by the stem prevents that. And then it also makes it easy to swirl. So if you're around some wine lovers, you've probably seen them swirling the glass. Holding it by the stem makes it easy to do so. So stem, never bowl is my motto when holding a wine glass. Next, we are about to open our bottle of wine. So we talked about the proper temperatures. We talked about the proper glassware and how to hold your glass. Now we are ready to open up a bottle of wine. And there are a ton of different wine openers on the market. My mom has an electric wine opener that she loves. You've also probably seen the winged wine opener where it has the two flaps that fold down to open up the wine bottle. But my personal favorite is using a standard waiter's corkscrew or a wine key. It has everything you need right in a small compact item. So on the screen, the handle is what you're going to use to help pull the cork out. You have the corkscrew, obviously. You have a foil cutter, and you have the hinges, which you use as leverage to pull the cork out of the bottle. And then what's also nifty about a waiter's corkscrew is you can also use it as a bottle cap remover. So everything you need right in this compact version. One thing to keep in mind is if your waiter's corkscrew has a foil cutter, you don't want to take it to the airport because TSA will confiscate it. So don't take it to the airport with you. I always have mine with me, but whenever I'm traveling, I make sure to not take my favorite wine key. So we're gonna play a video to show you how to use this nifty item.
So now that you know all the parts of a corkscrew, let's put it to use. So the first step is going to be to release the foil cutter and remove the foil cap. So to do this, you want to make a cut under the second lip. So I'm going to go ahead and make a cut one way, and then you can also come back around and do it. And then what's also helpful is to make a cut upward, and it'll just make it easy to get the cap off. So I made my cut up, and there you go, it's coming right off. So your foil is done. You can just discard that. You no longer need the foil cutter, so close it. And you're going to release the corkscrew. There's about 5 turns in a corkscrew, so you can just go ahead and insert the corkscrew. It's easy to start on an angle and then push upward so you get it right in the center. So make your turns. I like to leave a little bit for leverage. And then you're going to use the hinges as leverage to pull the cork out. So you're going to start on the first hinge here and pull upward using the handle. So it's come out a little bit. And then this is where the second hinge comes in handy because we've got the handle all the way up and we can't go anymore. So we're going to use the second hinge, pull up, and voila, your bottle of wine is open.
So as you can see, it's super easy to use the waiter's corkscrew. You have everything you need. So no more opening your wine bottle by pulling the cork right through the foil cap. That is not good because you get a lot of dripping when you leave the cap on without cutting it. And sometimes that flavor of the aluminum of the cap can make its way into your wine, and then you're not getting the full experience that you want. So using the waiter's corkscrew is super easy and it gets the job done. Now we're gonna show a video on how to open a bottle of sparkling wine. It's a little bit different and more involved. So let's get to that.
Hi, so let's talk about how to open a bottle of sparkling wine. The first step to opening a bottle of sparkling wine is making sure that your bottle is really cold. You don't want to open a warm bottle of wine. There's a lot of pressure in the bottle, so when you chill it, you're less likely to have a big explosion. The next step is to remove the foil. So most bottles of wine usually have a little tab on it to make it easy to remove the top of the foil. So I see that the tab on this bottle is right here. And I'm going to just take that off. And now the top of your foil is removed. So you can just discard that. The next step is to loosen the cage. So you'll see that the cage is twisted up. You just want to bring that down, and to loosen it fully, there's about 6 turns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, now once you loosen the cage, you want to make sure that you're leaving your thumb over top of the cage. Once you loosen it, you risk the cork popping out and hurting someone. You don't want that to happen. So just make sure you're putting a lot of pressure on it to protect it from coming out. The next step is to turn it about 40 degrees, and we're getting ready to open the bottle. So the key is to twist the bottom of the bottle. Don't twist the cork, you're gonna twist the bottle while keeping your hand on the top. So as soon as you twist the bottle once, you'll start to feel the cork pushing up, but you wanna do your best not to let it shoot out. What we want to happen here is a very, very soft sound. We don't want it to be super loud like we're popping bottles. We want it to be very, very soft. So just keep turning while pushing pressure down, and you'll get a very quiet sound. And now your bottle of wine is open.
So now we know how to open both a still bottle of wine and also a sparkling bottle of wine. I'm sure we've all heard the big pop sound from opening sparkling wines, but now you know you want to avoid the pop sound and splattering all your wine. You just got yourself a nice bottle of sparkling wine. Maybe it's champagne from the Champagne region, and you want to make sure you're savoring it and not wasting it everywhere. So your bottle of wine is open and we are ready to taste. Let's get into the 6 S's of wine tasting. The 6 S's are to see, swirl, smell, sip, swish, and then to spit or savor. So the first S of wine tasting is to see. So when you're looking at the wine, you're observing the color. Are you drinking a red wine? Is it rosé? Is it white wine? And what hue does the wine have? Different wine grapes will produce wine that has different colors. So with red wine, you may have a more purple color, you may have more ruby, and when you start to drink more older red wine, sometimes the color can tend to be tawny or brown. With white wine, it could be almost clear, like water in some cases, and then others have a more lemon or gold color. And then older white wine typically also has a bit of a golden brown color. I recently tasted a Chardonnay from California from about 30 to 40 years ago, and it was very, very brown, but still tasted really good. And then with rosé, the different grapes can produce different hues of the wine. So with the thin skin grape like Pinot Noir, you're only getting that light color, but some other thicker skin grapes sometimes produce a more pink color in the rosé. So that's what you're looking for when you're seeing the wine. The next step is to swirl. So we talked a little bit about swirling when we talked about how to hold the wine glass. And the purpose of swirling is to help open up the wine so you can smell all of the aromas. So it's easy to swirl if you're new to wine by placing it on a flat surface and then making little circle motions. Once you get that down, you can do it in your hand, but just try to be careful so you don't make a spill. And then when swirling, you can also observe the legs of the wine. So the legs can give you a clue about how much sugar and alcohol is in the wine. So if the wine produces thick legs or dense legs, that could tell you that maybe the wine has a lot of alcohol. And then if the wine has high sugar, sometimes the legs will flow down the side of the glass slower than a wine without sugar. So that's what people are referring to when they talk about the legs, but it just gives you a clue. It doesn't tell you anything definitive about the wine. The real purpose of swirling is so that you can smell the wine. And that brings us to number 3, and that's to smell. So smelling is absolutely the most important sense when drinking wine. So a lot of what you're experiencing in the wine glass is coming from your sense of smell. When you think about when you have a cold and your nose is stuffed up and it prevents you from tasting any kinds of foods. The same thing is true when it comes to wine. If your nose is stuffed up and you can't really smell much, you're not going to be able to smell all the beautiful aromas. So smell is so important when tasting wine. There are 3 categories of aromas that you may smell in your glass. And the first is primary. So primary aromas come from the actual grapes. So those flavors include fruits and herbs and florals. So if you smell and you start to smell raspberries or you start to smell roses, those are flavors and aromas that are coming from the characteristics of the grape. So different grapes are going to produce different styles of primary aromas. The next is secondary aromas, and this comes from the winemaking process. It's very common for winemakers to use oak in their wine, and oak adds sometimes bready notes, sometimes it adds some woody notes. So when you smell a red wine and it smells like wood, this is all coming from the oak. It can also sometimes give a vanilla, chocolate, or a spice aroma. So instead of coming from the grape, this comes from the winemaking process and what the winemakers are deciding to do to the wine. And then the last set of aromas are called tertiary aromas. And these aromas come from the aging process of wine. So most wines on the market are meant to be consumed right away. So when you go to your favorite wine shop and you buy a bottle of wine for, say, 20 bucks, that wine was meant for you to have it within a year or two of purchasing it. For me, most of the time, I drink them really quick. I'm impatient and I want to enjoy my wine with the dinner that I made that night. But when you are purchasing wine for the purpose of aging it for a long time, the wine starts to produce tertiary aromas. So as a wine starts to age, it starts to pick up some earthy characteristics, minerals, leather, and tobacco are also very characteristic aromas from aging for a long period of time. As the wine starts to age, it starts to lose those primary aromas and starts to pick up more of the secondary and tertiary aromas, making them more prominent. So with young wines, you're most likely just going to smell a lot of the beautiful fruit, herbs, and florals. Next, we have to sip and swish. So you swirled it, you smelled it, you got all the aromas, the primary, secondary, and tertiary, if any. And then now is the best part, is to sip the wine. So when sipping your wine, you want to take quite a good amount of wine. And what I mean by swish is not swish it around like you're using mouthwash. It's just to make sure that you're coating your full taste buds, you're letting the wine really fill your mouth so that you can experience the different characteristics of the wine. And you also can try to draw in a bit of air. It takes a bit of practice so you don't, get something on your shirt. But drawing in the air helps to move the aromas to your nose. Remember, smelling is one of the most important senses when drinking wine. So drawing in the air helps to get the full experience of smelling and tasting. And then the last step is to either spit or savor. So spitting is common if you're doing a large wine tasting and you're tasting maybe say 10 wines if you go to a winery, and you're not tasting with the goal of getting intoxicated. You're tasting the wine so that you can really observe the flavors. As you start to drink wine, you are going to start to feel the effects of the alcohol, and that diminishes your ability to analyze and to taste the different flavors. After a while, all the wines will start to taste the same, and this can be avoided by spitting out the wine. But you can also choose to savor. In most cases, we are all savoring our wine. Spitting is set aside for maybe a large trade tasting, or if you're going to a winery and tasting a lot of their wines on their tasting flight. So now we know the 6 S's of tasting wine. We're going to talk about the 5 golden characteristics next. Characteristic is sweetness versus dry. So a lot of times when we taste the wine, the first thing we may notice is if the wine is dry or if the wine is sweet. So sweetness refers to the amount of residual sugar left in the wine after fermentation. So if we go back to the very first slide, sugar plus yeast equals alcohol. Sometimes in a sweet wine, we don't let the yeast eat all the sugar and turn it into alcohol, and there's sugar left over. So that's how we get a sweet wine. Some bottles of wine will list the amount of residual sugar on the bottle, although that is not super common. So when trying to experience sweetness while you're tasting the wine, it could be felt on the tip of your tongue, or it can be sensed as a bit of an oily texture in the middle of your tongue. And then when talking about a dry wine, you want to be sure that you're only referring to the level of sugar in the wine. Sometimes dryness can be confused with tannin, which is another characteristic that we're going to cover today. So when talking about sweetness or dryness, you're just referring to the amount of sugar in the wine. And on the side, you can see the sweetness scale. And sweetness in wine is measured in grams per liter. So sometimes if you're looking for the RS on the bottle, you will see the grams per liter. So bone dry, so absolutely no sugar or less than 1 gram of sugar would be considered dry. Or it can get to very sweet, where you can get 120 grams per liter or even higher. The next characteristic is acidity. So acidity is what we experience when we bite into a lime or we have a really refreshing lemonade on a hot day. Think about when you were going to amusement parks and lemonade was so refreshing. And the reason it's refreshing is because of that acidity. So wine is the same way. When you're drinking wine, you experience acidity as a mouth-watering sensation. So high acid wines will really make your mouth water. So you want to stop and kind of hold your mouth open and see how much your mouth is watering. Maybe it has low acidity and you don't get much mouth watering. Or maybe you're drinking like a Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand, and that has a ton of acidity, so you'll feel a lot of saliva produced in your mouth. It also can produce a bit of a rough texture on the roof of your mouth. So that's another trick to kind of figure out if you're drinking a high acid wine or if you're drinking a low acid wine. And it'll vary depending on the grape that you're drinking and also the climate of the wine that you're drinking. So cooler regions typically have higher acidity, while warmer regions have lower acidity, because sugar and acidity are inversely related. So as the acidity decreases, the sugar increases. And in warm regions, the grapes are getting really ripe and producing a lot of sugars, but losing that acid component. So that brings us to tannin, which I mentioned is sometimes confused with dryness. And that's because it produces a drying sensation in your mouth. It feels like your mouth is getting sucked of all the saliva, almost like when you're at the dentist and you use that suction thing that they put in your mouth while they're cleaning your teeth. That's the sensation of tannin. And it's a compound that's found in the grape skins. And if you want to experience tannin outside of wine, try brewing a strong cup of black tea. You'll get that same sensation of your mouth feeling like it is very dried out and astringent. So that's a cool trick to kind of feel it when you are not drinking wine. So tannin can be low, medium, or high. And then one other thing to note here is that tannin is only considered when you're drinking a red wine. So as I mentioned, tannin comes from the grape skins. And in white wine, we don't use the grape skins because they don't have any color. But in red wine, we use the grape skins. So we are getting the color from the grape skins, but we're also picking up on that tannin. Now we're at body. So body refers to the weight of the wine in your mouth. And a really good analogy for this is drinking different types of milk. So skim milk feels a lot different in the weight compared to whole milk. Skim milk feels lighter, and you can think about this as like Pinot Noir or a light white wine like Pinot Grigio, where it doesn't have a lot of weight. Or you can think of, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, a Cabernet, which is going to be more full-bodied and feel closer to whole milk in your mouth. So wines with higher alcohol and tannin tend to have more body, and you'll be able to feel that that heavier sensation. The last characteristic is alcohol. So sugar is turned to alcohol in the fermentation process, and alcohol can be detected as the warm sensation in the back of your throat. So low alcohol wines like Riesling, you won't get that warm feeling in your mouth, but high alcohol wines, you'll almost feel like a fire-breathing dragon is what I say sometimes. You definitely get that heat a little bit more. Most wines fall in the median alcohol, where it's about 13 and a half. And I find that is the perfect level of alcohol because the heat sensation doesn't overwhelm all the other characteristics of the wine. So those are the 5 characteristics. And when we talk about balance in wine, balance is having all of those characteristics work really well together. So a wine can be considered out of balance if maybe the alcohol is too high, and that is taking away from how you're experiencing the other characteristics. So with balance, you want the sugar, the body, the acid, the tannin, and the alcohol all to be in harmony. And remember, harmony and balance, that is all a matter of your own opinion. One person may think the wine feels out of balance, but you may really love it and find that it is balanced in your opinion. It's all up to you. Wine is very subjective. So now that we've talked about the way you taste wine properly and the different characteristics, we can talk about some of the most popular varietals, and some of the terms will make more sense now that we have covered them. So some of the most popular white varietals include Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Riesling, and Pinot Grigio. Chardonnay is one of the most planted white grapes in the world. And it's because it's very versatile. It can grow in a very warm region, but it can also survive in a cool region. So it can grow pretty much anywhere. That's why we see Chardonnay in a lot of regions. In those wines, you'll get a lot of primary aromas like green fruit, citrus, peach, melon, some tropical flavors, but you also may get a lot of secondary aromas. So remember, secondary aromas come from the winemaking process. And when you think of a California Chardonnay, where winemakers are choosing to use a lot of oak, you'll definitely start to smell that in addition to those primary characteristics. So some of the most popular regions to find Chardonnay are in California and in France. Next, we'll cover Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc is a very aromatic, light-bodied white wine. And in that, you'll get some grapefruit, gooseberry. Gooseberry is not a very popular fruit, but you can find gooseberries at pretty much any Whole Foods. So if you're curious what a gooseberry tastes like, definitely try to get your hands on some, because it's very common in Sauvignon Blanc. It is sometimes referred to as a cat pee aroma, which sounds completely gross, but once you taste the gooseberry and then you taste the Sauvignon Blanc, you'll definitely start to understand how gooseberry got that descriptor. You'll also taste some white peach and tropical flavors like passion fruit. Sauvignon Blanc is very high acid, so you'll get a lot of that mouth-watering sensation, and it makes it really good with seafood. Some of the most popular regions for Sauvignon Blanc are New Zealand and France. Riesling is another high acid grape that grows really well in Germany, in France, and in Oregon. So one common misconception about Riesling is that Rieslings are always sweet, and that's absolutely not true. You can find versions of Riesling that are bone dry, or you can find some that are pretty sweet. So depending on your preference, I'm sure that you can find a Riesling that you'll love. And then some flavors that you can expect are lime, green apple, and floral aromas like a jasmine. The last white grape that we'll cover is Pinot Grigio or Pinot Gris. So that is two names for the same exact grape, but depending on where you are in the world will determine which term they use. So some flavors include white peach, lime, and cantaloupe. Pinot Grigio is what some people refer to as a porch pounder. It's one of those wines that you can sit out on a hot day and just really enjoy it because it's so light and refreshing. The best versions are found in Italy, but it's grown in quite a few regions around the world. So those are 4 really popular white grapes, but not all the white grapes. There are a ton of grapes in the world, but these are just the 4 most popular that'll help you start exploring some different ones. Moving on to red. One of the most popular red grapes is Cabernet. In Cabernet, you can get flavors of black cherry and black currant. Cabernet is a full-bodied wine, so it feels more like whole milk in your mouth as versus skim milk, and it also has a lot of tannin, so you'll definitely get that drying sensation. And when you have a full-bodied high tannin wine like Cabernet, it pairs really well with fatty foods and also steak, which has some fat and kind of grease to cut through that drying sensation in your mouth. So the most notable regions for Cabernet are France and California. The next grape is Merlot. Merlot is a red wine that is perfect for someone who's just getting started drinking red wines. I like to call Merlot mellow Merlot. It's medium bodied, medium tannin, has some blackberry, some plum flavors, and it's just a nice introduction into drinking red wines. Pinot Noir is the diva of the red grapes. Pinot Noir can only grow in regions that are cool because they will stop growing in regions that are too warm. Whereas Cabernet can grow in really hot regions and get really ripe. Pinot Noir likes it very, very cool. And with Pinot Noir, you can get flavors of strawberry, cherry, and then an earthy, almost like mushroom characteristic is common in French styles of Pinot Noir. It's light in tannin and good with chicken and salmon. So another misconception about red wine is that you can't pair it with fish. But when you're drinking a light-bodied wine like Pinot Noir, it can pair really well with salmon. So I challenge you to try that. And then the last one is Syrah and Shiraz. Again, another grape that has 2 names but refers to the same exact grape, just depends on where in the world you're purchasing it from. In this wine, you can get flavors of blueberry, plum, and Syrah also has a lot of peppery flavors. It's high in tannin, full-bodied, pairs well with dark meats. Again, remember that high tannin and full body will go really good with your dark meats. And some notable regions are the south of France and Australia. So again, just 4 red grapes, some really popular ones that you can get from different regions from around the world to start exploring some red varietals. So we're gonna end it with my favorite wine buying tips. So now that we have a good background of wine, We know how to taste wine. We know the 5 characteristics to analyze wine. We know the proper serving temperatures and the proper glassware to use with wine. Now we're ready to go out to the store and get wines to explore. Here are my top tips. Find a wine shop with knowledgeable staff. This is probably the most important tip when buying wine. Find yourself a wine shop that cares about its customers and is really invested in helping you find wines that you love. They don't just want to sell you the most expensive bottle or just anything. They want to help you find wines that you'll love. So if you find a good shop, they'll probably ask you maybe what you're cooking for dinner so you can find a wine to pair with dinner. Or if you're giving a gift to somebody, they'll try to gauge the preferences of the receiver of the gift so that you know you're getting good quality. You can start to build up a relationship with that person, and the next time you go in the wine shop, you can say, hey, I really love that wine that you recommended. Can you give me some other wines that are similar? Or if on the flip side, if you don't like the wine, you can say, hey, I didn't like that wine. I want to try something a little different. And the wine steward at the wine shop is going to know their inventory the best. So they'll be able to give you a really good description of the wines and help lead you in the right direction. Another tip is to do your research before shopping. One app that I really love is the Vino, and this is an app that you can go on to read reviews about wine. You can you scan the bottle and it pulls up the wine. It'll pull up the review of the wine, and you'll also get some information about where it's from, the tasting notes. So this is a really cool tip to do either before you go to the wine shop or while you're there. I also encourage you to try something new, to get out of your comfort zone. One of the first questions that we asked at the beginning was, do you only drink dry wines, or you only drink sweet wines, or do you stick to the same producer or wine label every time you go to the store? If you want to start to really take your wine tasting to the next level, you got to get out of your comfort zone and try something new. Next is to consider what you're eating and consider who you're sharing with. So I mentioned briefly some different wine pairing tips. And I say tips and not rules because I believe in exploration. So pairing seafood with Sauvignon Blanc is a really good guideline, but maybe you want to try something different to see how it goes. I believe in drinking what you like. So if you don't like Sauvignon Blanc, maybe try pairing the seafood with a Riesling. So consider what different foods you're eating and try to use the tips to guide you in the right direction. And then lastly is consider who you're sharing with. If you have someone who, you know, likes a certain style of wine, maybe you can try to get a wine that will fit both of your preferences. So those are my top tips for buying wine like a pro. I hope this session was super helpful. This was just an introduction into wine. I always say the best way to learn about wine is to taste it. So I hope you take this knowledge and run with it and apply it to all the wines that you're going to taste in the future. So I hope we can stay connected. I have my email, my website, and then my social media listed here. So I hope to connect with you and happy to make recommendations for wines if you need it. I want to thank Elizabeth for having me. This was fun.
Yes, it was extremely fun. I want to thank you so much for this presentation. I think everyone probably now is going away with a little bit more of an expert on wine. I know that there's maybe some new things I need to try because I'm a sweet wine person all the way. And I might try dry wine. I might try dry wine. You might have convinced me. So thank you again. Thank you all for sticking with us and watching this. I'm sure you got a great amount out of it. We want to remind everyone to drink responsibly if you are drinking, and make sure to consider the resources that PGCMLS has. We have some great books on wine. I think one really popular one recently was the Wine Bible on
Wine Bible.
yeah, I know, and then we do have that in the system, so check that book out. And just thank you so much. I know during this time we're trying to look for creative ways to still enjoy the things we enjoy, so I hope you found this presentation useful, and thank you again, Desiree. And everyone have a great day or evening. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.